Welcome to another episode on the People Productivity Channel, where you are the product and a better you is a solution. As always, we bring on very interesting guests, and today is no exception. Today I have on Ray Pawlicki. I met Ray through business, fascinating guy, very successful. Ray has been a serial, Fortune, 200 CIO. He sits on many boards, some very interesting ones. Maybe we'll get into that. But Ray, why don't you just do a quick intro for the audience?
Yeah, happy to do so, Frank. First of all, thanks for having me and looking forward to our conversation. My background is I joined most of my career in the last 20 years is around the healthcare industry, and a lot of my experience, especially around culture. And I joined that healthcare industry back in the year 2000 as the CIO, or Chief Information Officer, for Novartis in the US. I did that for 3 or 4 years, and then was asked to be their Global CIO out in Basel, Switzerland, and to my family, at which point my wife and I said no. I just built a house a few years ago. I just put in a pool in the end of the cul-de-sac. The kids were like 7 and 11. Yeah. But after a lot of thought, my wife and I said to each other, would we want to be born, raised, live and die in New Jersey, or 5 years in Europe? So with that context, off we went. And we said it was the 4 best years of our life, actually. And I was the global CIO for Novartis Pharmaceuticals, which was quite a learning experience. And then,
big learning experience, foreign country, the scale of the job. Wow.
Yeah, between trying to adjust personally to a new culture you're living in, and then the culture at Novartis between the US and Switzerland is actually very different. So that was a major adjustment. I remember at one of my first executive committee meetings, I had to present a little bit on IT, and I had done an offsite where we did a bunch of brainstorming and let the ideas flow. And I came back to the executive committee and said, we narrowed it down to 7 or 8 ideas, and here's what they are. We're going to try them all, see which ones stick and which ones kind of fade, and we'll go from there. And I got this stare from the CEO and other people around the table were kind of going, uh-oh. And what very quickly is, in the US, at least in Novartis, the culture was that's what you do. You try a bunch of things, you see what sticks, what doesn't. Yeah. Not in Switzerland. The culture there was, by the time you're presenting to the executive committee, you've picked the 2 or 3 things you're going to do. You've planned them out. You have the budget, and you start execution. It's not about what's going to stick. So one of my first
great learning experience, right?
Yeah, exactly. First stub of the toe on the new job. Yeah. But anyway, I did that, and then on the way back to the US, I took a job with Biogen as their CIO. And did that for several years. And then after being a CIO for, I think, about 20 years, I stepped down from that type of work. And now, as you mentioned earlier, I focus on board work. I sit on the board of a hospital system, sit on the board of a local payer, regional payer here in New England, as well as 3 or 4 startups. And so I get a real kind of blend. Some of the bigger traditional boards where you think of sort of gray suits and maroon ties. Yeah. And then the smaller boards where you think of like a, super smart younger person that's just sort of got a great idea and driving a new technology or something. And so that's my background. My degrees in computer science, and have been in and around technology my whole career.
Yeah, you've had a super interesting career, and it continues. But I know early on from our conversations, you understood that the human element at work was really the big factor that made the difference. So what was your epiphany anyway?
Yeah, so it probably was a little bit less of a on-off switch, as more as it was learning over time. So prior to joining the healthcare industry, I was in fast-moving consumer goods. And I didn't like the culture. It was very much on who's the most clever person in the room, and it was a
Huh.
little,
Yeah, I don't like those either.
yeah, it was just not,
Uncollaborative.
yeah, yeah, and when I left there, I said, that's not something I enjoy or something I want to do. And I left there for actually my first CIO job before joining the healthcare industry with a specialty chemicals company.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and that's when I said, I want to create a culture in my organization that's not like that. But I really wasn't sure how to do that. So I just sort of started listening and learning and reading, and slowly but surely, I came to the conclusion that in order to do that, it has to be a commitment on the part of the head of the department, and it has to be an openness and a willingness to stretch yourself,
Mm-hmm.
and stay committed to culture and to the people. And man, does it pay off! It really
Oh,
does.
it's enormous. That was that was my journey too. And you learn so much from seeing what not to do.
Yeah,
Because I was going around, in my career, I kept getting moved, and I'd end up in different toxic places, either trying to fix something or do something. And if the overarching culture was the root cause and I didn't control that, you'd really begin to see the detrimental effects of bad human toxic behavior in the workplace. So
and
destructive.
it is, and sometimes it's a blatant toxicity, and other
Yeah.
times undercurrent that just takes the fun out of just being yourself
Yeah.
in the environment. So
Yeah, totally. So, what were some of the things you did to build a great culture that maybe the people listening in can learn from? Because everybody is on a team. They may not be leading it. They have influence, right? Everybody can contribute, and in effect, they can help themselves and the culture and teams they work with.
yeah, there's a couple of components, but I think the one of the ones that's sort of my top of my list, towards the top of my list, is enabling people to volunteer for the type of work that they're passionate about, are interested in, or have competence. And it may and may not be part of their actual job at the moment. So having people raise their hand to offer to help with something, I found had people more fulfilled, had people more engaged. And we started off with this concept of, when you're in your job, you're accountable for whatever is on sort of your objectives
Yep.
for the, but we would encourage people to say, you got to do that first and foremost. You got to do your
Yeah.
accountabilities. But we'd encourage people to take what we used to call responsibility for things that they were not accountable for. And the first, reaction you get from people is, well, oh, I'm already working a 50-hour week. How can I do that? And you'd be surprised that when people choose to help somebody or help a problem or build a new algorithm or whatever it is about something that they're passionate about, the time shows up. The time just
Yeah.
shows up.
They do find the time and they find the energy to do it, which is always interesting, right? And I found over time that people who volunteered were leaning more towards their strengths because it was their passion. They're like, oh, I want to go do that. Made such a difference.
Yeah, and over time, the entire organization becomes more fulfilled in their work. So they're just the culture that emerges from that is a culture of satisfaction, culture where people feel like they're making a contribution. It's a culture of people actually trying to help others if they think they can. And so that was a big piece, and we started that with you and I have chatted once or twice about these open space meetings.
Yes. Uh-huh.
And in this open space meeting setting, it's exactly that, where people suggest different topics to talk about, and then in a 2-day offsite, people who are at the meeting sign up for the components that they want to actually partake in. So there might be 30 topics over a day and a half, and you can only attend 10 or so. But it's not like somebody hands you an agenda and
Yeah.
says, here's what you need to focus on in the next day and a half, or please sit in your chair for a day and a half and listen to presentation. But rather create your own agenda and go to a meeting or a conversation where you think you can really make a difference. So, and doing that, having that in place, we did that about once every 6 or 9 months. That kept that alive. That kept that alive. So.
Yeah, and I'll tell you that drive, that energy, that passion is enormous. And then those helping behaviors, I always found them to be just so incredibly important. New people coming in, they talk about onboarding and these formal processes. If everybody helps others, it really augments what's provided in a standardized way, because people pitch in, they know it's a helping culture and they want the other person to succeed.
Yeah, and we used to say, as part of our culture, we would like you to have a concern for the other person's concern. So that was, we would use that phrase, and people would.
I like it.
And I found there's a lot there in language, in using phrases like that.
Yeah.
And as the head of the department, standing up and saying that over and over again. First time this bounces off people. About the fourth or fifth time you say it, it starts to slowly resonate.
Yeah, those values really, really matter. And when they're catchy, people remember them. Yeah, which is super important. What other ones? Do you remember any others that you used to use?
Another one we used to use was listening for possibility. So, people, when you listen, you listen a lot of different ways. You listen to somebody agreeing with me, disagreeing with me. Are they on my side? Are they not on my side? And we used to, at the beginning of a meeting, we would say, look, try to put everything aside, and I want you to just listen for possibility, and not listen to necessarily
don't judge it.
Conclusion or judge, is this a good thing or is this a bad thing? And then we would say, this is a meeting where I need you to listen for possibility. People would just go, and that good brainstorming session would often emerge from there. So that was another one that then spawned into, we used to say, listening actually grants speaking. So when you have a good idea and you go up to somebody and you tell them the idea, and then they kind of work with you a little bit and you go back and forth, it could be a hallway conversation, for 5, 7, and you walk away saying, man, this is a good idea and that person contributed to it and I want to continue to drive it. Then you walk down the hall in the other direction and you have the same passion and you have that same energy, and you talk to somebody else and it just falls flat. Next thing you know, you're stumbling over your words a little bit, and we would often say that was the first person was listening for possibility, the second person wasn't. So that then turned into this next phrase of listening actually grants speaking.
Which is cool. I like that. Listening is one of the most vital things people can do. And most people really aren't good listeners. They're already thinking about what they're going to say next. They're judging what the person's saying. They're doing everything but, listening with for possibilities. They're not doing that.
And one of the things I learned over the years was, I always just listened the way I listened growing up. I had no idea that I could learn to listen differently, and learn to have a choice about how I want to listen, as opposed to just showing up and listening. And we had another phrase that was like, if you take a ball and you throw it, the ball has no choice. It's going at a certain speed. Gravity is going to grab it and is eventually going to pull it down. So that ball is thrown, and it's going to go where gravity is going to take it.
Yeah.
And we say you want to try to avoid having your thrown listening. So you don't want to be the ball that has no choice,
Yeah.
You don't want to, and then it would be thrown behaviors.
Yeah.
And we would say, wait a minute, try not to get a thrown behavior here, but try to have a choice. And the interesting thing was a lot of these things you can learn. And I didn't realize starting off in the culture world how much low-hanging fruit there is as soon as you decide to engage and say you want to learn and improve
To
yourself.
this day, it is still a low-hanging fruit world when it comes to culture. There's a lot of talk about it and people do better, but in general, many of the executives just don't understand it, I think.
Yeah, and I don't know exactly why, Frank, but I think one of the early conclusions I came to over the years was if you have a CEO, obviously he or she has been extremely successful
Mm-hmm.
and is now the CEO. And in getting to become the CEO, if their way of managing has been extremely successful.
Yeah.
So why would they get interested in A, them changing that, or B, getting involved in this conversation around culture when they haven't been leveraging culture to get where they are? And you see
Valid.
that in a command and control type CEO. So I think that's one of the tricky parts is, and needless to say, if you have a CEO who grew up in his or her career knowing about culture, teaching culture, embracing it, learning from it, and leveraging it to create a better work environment, then those CEOs will jump right into this conversation. But if they haven't, man, it's hard to.
It's foreign. You're right. And, people play to their strengths. So it's hard for them to kind of relearn how to be that leader at that point in time because they got to produce. So.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And it's so hard to reinvent yourself like that too. I mean, certainly you can't blame a CEO for not getting interested, because that's hard work. It
really is. It comes down to really caring about people and their experience at work. And, if you don't care about people particularly, it's hard to suddenly start caring because it's not going to be sincere.
Yeah. But that's another phrase we used to use, is to say, we would like to really focus on the complete person.
Mm-hmm.
And what I found over the years is when you're embracing culture and you're offering people an opportunity to learn to listen differently, offering them an opportunity to learn about their behaviors, they don't just use it at work. That really helps the complete person. And then that just creates a whole nother exciting part about the culture where people are feeling appreciative that the company is actually helping them, not necessarily helping them only do a better job, but helping. And one of the funniest stories I heard is we were going to have this 2-day offsite on culture. We were going to focus on listening. And I talked to this one guy that was coming, and he worked, his wife worked, they had young kids. So they would always try to avoid travel because it's just complicated, I guess, in the next family, what have you. But then traveling was difficult for them. And he told his wife, he said, look, I'm going to be away it's a 2-day session. I'm only going to be away for one night. She's like, oh, okay, what's the topic? He goes, we're going to focus on listening. And his wife said to him, if you're going to learn how to be a better listener, how to listen, you can go away for a whole week.
Yeah, just stay there till you're finished, right? Yeah.
But that's to the point where, you could bring this stuff home with you.
Yeah, my wife would say the same thing, I'll be honest. There's no question. Frank, go. Yeah, I do think, building a really good culture where people learn to care about one another has an impact on their own personal life. They view the world differently.
And then they come to work with more of a hop in their step,
Yeah.
As opposed to dragging their briefcase in and saying, oh boy, more drudgery. We used to use this phrase, committed versus compliant. And when you're committed to something, you're passionate about it, you care about it. Kind of like you and I talking about culture. We're clearly committed to culture. I don't need a PowerPoint presentation to read off of what's important about culture. We
Yeah.
just talk about it. And then so that's an example of somebody that's committed to something versus somebody who's compliant with something and doing what they're told to do and checking boxes. And it's not a fulfilling type role. And in the workplace, obviously there's certain things you have to do to be compliant with, but the idea would be is we wanted people working in a committed fashion, 60, 70% of the time at work. And we used to say, it's okay if you're in a job where you're not committed, raise your hand, tell your boss, and we'll work to find something where you can be committed.
Fantastic way to handle it. Because why let somebody sit there and stew when they're really in something that's just not at all interesting to them,
Yeah, and then the vibe they're putting off is, not the culture, is not going to contribute to the culture.
They'll take it down.
Yeah. Well, it's just the opposite. The people who are committed to what they're doing, when they go to the coffee machine, they're in a pretty good spot, and they're not going to gossip about what's wrong with everything, but rather they're going to be more constructive.
It'll be upbeat, and mood is so contagious.
Yeah. Right. There's certainly a tipping point with culture too.
There is.
It takes a while to get there. As another, culture is a journey, marathon, anything but a sprint. And I also learned that you need to put a program in place. You can't wish a good culture. You can't intend a good culture. You could get a little bit of culture change as the head of the department based upon who you are and the values you espouse and how you treat people. That helps the culture or can spark the culture a bit. But the real trick I found, or the necessity that I found, is you need a multi-year program where you're continuing to learn how to contribute to the culture. What can you do differently as a person to help with the culture? And then over a year, 2 or 3, people in the department realize how important this is to the success of the department, to the success of the company, to the success of themselves. And the dots start to get connected. While if there is a culture initiative, for a month and you have to read a booklet or something and check a box, it doesn't go that far. But
that's right. Posters on the wall.
Yeah, exactly.
How many times have you go in a company and you see the poster in the elevator on the walls? Here's our 5 values, and nobody has a clue how to live them. I mean, that is just so common. Culture's hard work. I mean, you have to really stick with it. And I agree with you. I see companies saying we could get your culture transforming in as little as 2 weeks. And it's like, come on. These are humans, Look how hard it is for somebody to change themselves, let alone change others. My God, it's not that easy.
Yeah. And that's another thing too, is you pick up pretty quickly on folks who are committed to culture and maybe it's somehow a natural strength for them. And then you kind of create your, or identify people we used to call our culture creators. And these were people who right from the outset saw the value in it. And then, that would be something that they may not be accountable for, took responsibility for helping to drive the culture. And all of a sudden, that they had time and effort and energy. And then that really helps the snowball effect. So
I like culture creator better than culture ambassador. It's a more active role. I like that.
And people like that term. I mean, they like that title to say, hey, I'm a culture creator. And of course, we kid about it and we can have fun. But in the end, they were identified as folks that others could go to say, hey, I'm not getting this. What's this committed versus compliant thing? Can we have lunch and help me kind of connect the dots a little bit?
Great conversation that they would care enough to even inquire, right? Because then they really want to be committed. They don't understand it.
And again, they would never do that until you're into it for like a year. The folks who don't naturally migrate towards culture. The first year they're a little bit more like this, but over time, actually two things happen over time. The people will eventually get interested, and they're not going to be a culture creator, and it's not something that's overly natural to them or their strength, but they're in. They're part of the team. They're in. They're trying, and others will self-select and leave, and simply say, "Hey, I just want to be left in a corner and do my thing," or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, I found the same thing, that if the culture starts to really get ignition, the people who just don't feel comfortable in that environment, they don't want to contribute, help, share, do all the things necessary to create a successful and collaborative place, they start to feel a little more uncomfortable. And eventually, they self-select and say, hey, I'm going to do better somewhere else.
Yeah, and the other thing that happens as well is, especially in the Boston area with Biogen, it's a small city, if you will, Boston, Cambridge, and especially in the biopharma industry. And before too long, word gets out that you don't want to work at this department in this company, or in this company in general, because man, that culture is difficult. It's cutthroat. It's commanding, or whatever. And in the same breath, what also gets out is you do want to go work at this company, and you do want to go work in that department. And man, towards the maybe the second half of my tenure at Biogen, we were able to hire people that we would not have been able to hire otherwise, because the word was on the street. It's a pretty good place to work.
Yeah, and word gets out faster than ever now with Glassdoor.
Yeah.
And all these other sites. Culture is a public phenomenon in reality at this point in time. So I just don't understand why more companies don't take it seriously. The benefits are so incredibly well documented.
I think the tide's turning a little bit. I see maybe the next generation of CEOs have a tendency to be more open to having a genuine culture initiative. A lot of them don't know how to do it, and it may be the poster in the elevator, but it is turning a little bit with the next generation of CEOs, because I think most of them have grown up at some point in their career where they've experienced a good and bad culture or culture initiative, while the previous generation might have come up in more of a
real command and control. People don't count. People are interchangeable parts, those cultures.
Yeah. And that was, for better or worse, that's what was common in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, right? Yeah, that's how it was. Right. And that's what they know. But now the next generation, I think, luckily, can think a bit broader than that.
Yeah, I must say if you look at the amount of material, companies and other things that are written and are happening out in the market relative to building cultures. So there's a tidal wave of stuff going on.
Yeah.
And it's all good.
Yeah. No, and I can think of 2 or 3 large companies where the CEO that's in there now is embracing culture, trying to drive culture, and their predecessor was specifically command and control.
Yeah.
And that's difficult for people too, because if you've worked in a company for 15 years where it's command and control, you've learned to just say, hey, as long as I do what my boss tells me to do or asks me to do, and I keep my nose clean, I'm going to be okay, and I'm not going to buck the trend or come up with any ideas or challenge people or really get into healthy, constructive debates. I'm just going to stay in my lane. And then you ask them to get out of that lane.
Oh yeah, hard. Takes a while.
It does.
To get that level of trust that if I step out of the lane, I'm not going to get hit by a car.
Right.
Takes a while, right?
Especially if for 15 years and they saw a bunch of colleagues step out of their lane and get run over by a bus,
Yeah. Yeah, that long list of former coworkers, Really interesting. So What other things come to mind with culture, Ray?
Let's see. I would say probably one of the most important things is getting people to get interested in improving themselves. And it's and if it's not improving themselves, understanding themselves a little better. Because when people are willing to do that, then I think you really start to see people engaging and digging in a little bit more. And the other, we talk about often with culture that, it's collaborative, working together, supportive, but that directly, leads to performance of the company, because people are in a culture like that, they will freely speak about what they think the right thing is to do, about a good idea. And if you combine that with a diverse environment, with
Yep.
people thinking differently, approaching things differently, and you have the culture where people can speak up freely, man, good ideas,
Oh, yeah.
they just emerge, people support them. So when you combine diversity with that type of culture, it really can really explode. And you see the departments doing things they've never done before and doing it with passion, and they get noticed. They
Notice.
absolutely get noticed within the company. Hey, what's going on over there? Well, that type of thing happens all the time. And then additionally, we had one other phrase we used to use, which was, you have the capability to make an unreasonable request to anyone. And that everybody also knew that, and you would say that, look, I have an unreasonable request. And the person on the receiving end of that knew absolutely it was fine to decline or counteroffer. And that was another means to get folks to stretch themselves, to do things. So it's not just about collaboration, I guess is my point here. It's and having a comfortable environment. It's about how when people can speak freely, great ideas really emerge and get executed on. And then with unreasonable requests or some mechanism to pull, then you put all those things together. And as the famous quote will say, culture will certainly trump strategy, or have just strategy for lunch. And you can see that actually happening.
It really, really does. You did a lot. And obviously, you built successful cultures for real. And, I love just chatting about this stuff because it's one of my passions. The ability to make an unreasonable request and the, other person can decline, counteroffer. That's great. Really good.
And it's phrases like that you can come up with in these open space meetings, where people can generate ideas. Then at some point, the culture, that just runs, you have to maintain it, and you have to offer, you have new people coming in all the time, so you have to train them. So there's a whole maintenance process that has to go on. But in the same breath, there's inertia there. And it's and when I left different companies over time, what people, you have a beer with them a couple of years later or what have you, and what they remember is not anyone, even if it was one of my bosses or what have you, they didn't remember what I did. They didn't say, man, you brought that big project in on time, on budget. It really made a difference to the business. That's not where the conversation would go. The conversation would go around how you treated people. Did you care?
I really enjoyed working in your department, That's what I would hear. And it was always gratifying because they never did talk about, oh, yeah, wow, you got that XYZ project done. That's not what they care about.
I mean, you got to do that, but that's not, like you say, that's not in the heart. That's not what people are, that's not what they.
Not at all. Not at all. Well, I think we've got to hope for a world where, more and more great cultures get spawned, because that's where all the innovation, the jobs, and, the future wealth come from and get created. So.
Absolutely. And I think that the tide is turning in our direction for sure, Frank. It
I
might take
think so too.
10, 20, 30 years, but I'm glad it's going that way as opposed to the other
Oh,
way.
me too. I feel very good about the future. I think, the bumps in the road are clearly evident, but the long term is, we're going to have a more innovative culture in companies. More stuff's going to get created. It's never been easier to create things than it is today. So I think we get a real revolution of innovation. I think people will be surprised what comes out of it once we get some of all these irrational things going on behind us.
Yeah, no, I agree. Almost like you want to blink your eyes and have it be 18 months from now.
Yeah. Wouldn't that be great? Well, Ray, buddy, look, really appreciate you coming on. And it was a very good conversation. I hope people take away from this the fact they could be contributors to building a better culture starting tomorrow. Anybody could do that. So
Absolutely.
listen, thank you so much and be well, buddy.
Yeah, Frank,
Take care.
all the best. Real pleasure.